The anxiety trap. Why your worry proves you're clinging and how Buddhism breaks you free. Opening hook, the revelation. Stop for a moment and notice what your mind is doing right now. Is there a worry sitting quietly in the background? Maybe it's about money, a relationship, your health, or something you said yesterday that keeps replaying in your head. Here's something that will change how you see that worry forever. That anxiety you're feeling isn't protecting you from danger. It's actually proof that you're trapped in an illusion. And here's the part that really matters. Buddhism discovered the precise mechanism of this trap 2,500 years ago, and modern neuroscience is only now catching up. What you're about to learn isn't just philosophy or ancient wisdom. It's a practical, step-by-step understanding of how your mind creates suffering out of thin air, and more importantly, how to stop it. By the end of this exploration, you won't just understand why you worry. You'll see the invisible pattern that generates anxiety automatically, and you'll have the exact tools Buddhist practitioners have used for millennia to break free from it. This isn't about positive thinking or suppressing your emotions. It's about seeing reality so clearly that worry loses its power over you completely. So take a breath, because what we're about to uncover will transform not just how you think about anxiety, but how you experience every moment of your temporary, precious, irreplaceable life. Lay life. Part 1. The Architecture of Human Anxiety. Let's start with something honest and immediate. You know those nights when your body's exhausted but your mind refuses to rest? You lie there in the darkness, eyes closed, trying to sleep, and instead your thoughts start running through scenarios. What if the project fails? What if they're angry at me? What if something happens to my parents? What if I can't pay next month's rent? This isn't rare. This isn't a personal weakness. This is the human condition playing out in your nervous system every single night for millions of people around the world. And the strange thing is, most of these feared scenarios never actually happen, yet the suffering they create is absolutely real. The philosopher Montaigne captured this perfectly when he observed that his life had been full of terrible misfortunes, most of which never happened. Think about that for a moment. Your mind is manufacturing suffering about events that exist only in imagination. You're experiencing real anxiety, real stress hormones flooding your body, real sleep loss over situations that are completely fictional. But before we dismiss this as simply irrational, we need to understand why your brain does this. There's a reason, and it's actually rooted in survival. Your ancestors, the ones who survived enough to pass their genes down to you, were the ones who stayed alert to danger. The ones who heard a rustling in the grass and thought, could be nothing, probably just the wind, sometimes got eaten by predators. The ones who heard that same rustling and immediately activated their threat response, those were the ones who lived. So your brain inherited a negativity bias, a tendency to scan for threats and imagine worst-case scenarios. This system, this ancient alarm mechanism, was incredibly useful when humans faced immediate physical dangers. The problem is that same system is still running in an environment where the threats have completely changed. You're not being chased by predators. You're sitting at your desk looking at an email. You're not fighting for survival in the wilderness. You're lying in a comfortable bed worrying about a conversation that might happen tomorrow. Your Stone Age brain is treating modern uncertainties like life or death emergencies, and that mismatch is exhausting you. But here's where it gets even more interesting, and this is where Buddhism's insight becomes revolutionary. Your anxiety isn't just about the fear itself. It's about how that fear reveals about how you're relating to reality. Every worry is actually a signal that you're clinging to something, trying to control something, or refusing to accept something about the nature of existence. Let me explain what I mean. When you worry about losing your job, what's really happening? On the surface, you're concerned about money, security, identity. But look deeper. You're operating under an assumption that things should stay stable, that what you have now should continue indefinitely, that you can and should be able to control your future circumstances. When reality threatens that assumption, anxiety is the result. When you worry about a relationship changing or ending, you're not just sad about losing connection. You're resisting the fundamental truth that everything changes, that nothing you love can be held permanently, that every relationship exists in time, and time moves forward whether you want it to or not. The worry is your mind's way of trying to freeze reality, to make permanent what is inherently impermanent. This is the trap. You're not suffering because bad things might happen. You're suffering because you believe, deep in your bones, that bad things shouldn't happen, that you should be able to prevent them, that reality should conform to your preferences. And every moment that reality refuses to cooperate, every reminder that you can't control outcomes, every hint that change is coming whether you like it or not, triggers that anxiety response. Buddhism calls this fundamental misunderstanding avidya, or ignorance. Not ignorance in the sense of lacking information, but ignorance in the sense of not seeing reality clearly. It's the gap between how things actually are and how you believe they should be. And that gap is where all your suffering lives. Students feel this when they worry about exams, imagining that their entire future depends on one test score. Parents feel this when they worry about their children, trying desperately to protect them from every possible harm. Elderly people feel this when they worry about death, resisting the natural conclusion of the life cycle. The content changes, but the pattern is identical. Clinging to control in a reality that cannot be controlled, demanding permanence in a universe built on change. And here's the exhausting part. The more you worry, the more you reinforce the belief that worry is necessary. Your brain starts to associate anxiety with being responsible, with being prepared, with caring. You begin to think that if you're not worrying about something, you're being careless or naive. The worry becomes not just a response, but an identity. You become someone who worries, and then you worry about not worrying enough. This creates a cruel cycle. You worry about something that might happen. That worry makes you feel terrible. Then you worry about feeling terrible. Then you worry about the fact that you can't stop worrying. The original threat, which may never materialize, has now created multiple layers of actual present moment suffering. Notice what's happening here. The future problem is hypothetical, but the suffering is happening right now. You're sacrificing your present peace for a future that doesn't exist yet and may never exist. And even if that feared outcome does occur, you'll have suffered twice, once in anticipation and once in reality. The worry doesn't protect you, it just makes you experience the pain earlier and longer. Buddhism sees this pattern clearly and offers something radical. What if the problem isn't the uncertainty of life, but your relationship with uncertainty? What if anxiety isn't a sign that you need to control more, but a sign that you're trying to control what cannot be controlled? What if the solution isn't to eliminate threats, but to fundamentally change how you meet the inherent instability of existence? This is where the path begins. Not with denial, not with positive thinking, not with trying to convince yourself that everything will be okay, but with a clear, unflinching look at what's actually happening in your mind when worry arises, and what that worry reveals about your deepest assumptions about life, control, and change. Part 2. The 3 Marks and the Root of Clinging. To understand why worry has such a grip on the human mind, we need to go deeper into Buddhism's analysis of reality itself. The Buddha didn't just offer techniques for feeling better. He offered a systematic deconstruction of how and why we suffer, starting with 3 fundamental characteristics that mark all of existence. These are called the 3 marks of existence, and understanding them is like getting a map to the architecture of your own anxiety. The first mark is impermanence, anicca in the Pali language. This sounds simple, almost obvious. Of course things change. We all know that. We've watched seasons turn, seen children grow, witnessed relationships evolve, experienced loss. We intellectually understand that nothing stays the same. But here's the problem. We don't actually believe it. Not in our bones, not in the way we live. Watch your own mind carefully. You'll notice that you live as though the people you love will always be available. You plan as though your health will continue. You arrange your life as though your job security is guaranteed. You invest emotionally as though your circumstances are stable. These aren't conscious decisions. They're deep assumptions that operate below awareness, and they shape everything about how you move through the world. When the Buddha said all conditioned things are impermanent, he wasn't making a philosophical point. He was describing what he observed with extraordinary precision. Everything that arises, everything that exists because of causes and conditions, everything in your direct experience is in constant flux. Your body is replacing millions of cells every second. Your emotions are arising and dissolving continuously. Your thoughts are flickering in and out of existence. Even the solid objects around you are, at the atomic level, mostly empty space with particles vibrating and exchanging energy. Nothing, absolutely nothing, is standing still. And yet your mind operates as if you can find something permanent to hold on to, some stable ground where you can finally rest without fear of change. This is the fundamental delusion that generates anxiety. You're trying to build a permanent home in a universe where everything is in motion. Now, if this were just an abstract philosophical problem, it wouldn't matter much, but it's not abstract at all. This delusion has immediate, concrete consequences. When you don't truly accept impermanence, you suffer. Not sometimes, not occasionally, but constantly, because reality keeps changing and you keep being surprised and hurt by that change. This brings us to the second mark of existence, dukkha. This word is usually translated as suffering, but that translation misses important nuance. Dukkha is more accurately understood as unsatisfactoriness, a pervasive sense that something is not quite right, that you can't rest completely, that even pleasant experiences contain a subtle undercurrent of anxiety because you know they won't last. Think about even the happiest moments of your life, really good ones, moments of joy, connection, success, pleasure. If you look closely, there's often a shadow in those moments, a whisper in the back of your mind that says, "This won't last," or "I hope this doesn't end," or "I wish I could keep this forever." That whisper is dukkha. It's the dissatisfaction that comes from trying to extract permanent happiness from temporary conditions. The Buddha wasn't being pessimistic when he named this, he was being precise. He wasn't saying that everything is terrible or that life is only pain. He was saying that as long as you're looking for lasting satisfaction in things that change, you will experience this fundamental unsatisfactoriness. It's like trying to quench your thirst by drinking salt water. The activity feels like it should satisfy the need, but it actually makes the problem worse. This is why worry is so insidious. When you worry, you're usually worrying about losing something pleasant or gaining something unpleasant. You're worried about change disrupting your current arrangement. And that worry is proof that you haven't accepted the second mark of existence. You're still operating under the belief that you can arrange life in a way that provides permanent satisfaction, and you're anxious about anything that threatens that arrangement. But the deepest insight, the one that really unlocks the pattern, is the third mark, anatta, or not self. This is where Buddhism becomes genuinely radical.
where it diverges from almost every other philosophical and religious tradition. The Buddha taught that what you call I, or me, or self is not a fixed, unchanging entity. It's a process, a stream, a constantly shifting collection of physical and mental phenomena. You have a body, but the body is changing constantly. You have feelings, but feelings arise and pass away. You have perceptions, thoughts, habits, consciousness itself, and all of these are in flux. So where exactly is the permanent self that you're so worried about protecting? If you look carefully, directly, without preconceptions, you can't actually find it. What you find instead is a flowing river that you've labeled me. This might sound abstract or philosophical, but it has immediate practical implications for understanding worry. Most of your anxiety is about protecting or enhancing a self-image that doesn't actually exist in the way you think it does. You worry about your reputation, which is really worrying about how an imaginary entity called me appears in other people's minds. You worry about failure, which is really worrying about whether your self-story will have a happy ending. You worry about death, which is really worrying about the extinction of something that was never solid to begin with. When you believe in a fixed, permanent self, every change becomes a threat. If I am supposed to be consistent, then getting older threatens my identity. If I am supposed to be successful, then failure threatens my sense of self. If I am supposed to be liked, then criticism threatens who I think I am. The more solid you believe yourself to be, the more fragile you actually become, because reality keeps demonstrating that nothing about you is truly solid. But here's where it gets really interesting. These three marks, impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and not self, aren't separate problems. They're intimately connected. Three aspects of the same fundamental pattern. Because things are impermanent, clinging to them creates unsatisfactoriness. Because there's no permanent self, trying to protect a fixed identity creates anxiety. The three marks point to one underlying truth. Resistance to reality creates suffering. And what is worry if not resistance? When you worry about the future, you're resisting the uncertainty that is inherent in time. When you worry about loss, you're resisting the impermanence that is inherent in all things. When you worry about what people think of you, you're resisting the groundlessness of self. Every worry is a little war with reality, and in that war, you always lose, because reality doesn't change to accommodate your preferences. The Buddha used a powerful analogy to explain this. He said that clinging to impermanent things is like holding a hot coal. You don't burn just because the coal is hot. You burn because you refuse to let go. The pain comes not from the heat itself, but from your insistence on holding on to something that hurts you. And worry is the mental equivalent of clutching that burning coal, convinced that if you just grip it tightly enough, you can somehow make it cool. This is the pattern that Buddhism wants you to see clearly, not to believe it because the Buddha said so, but to investigate it directly in your own experience. Look at a moment of worry. What are you clinging to? What are you trying to control? What permanence are you demanding in an impermanent situation? What solid ground are you seeking where no solid ground exists?
When you start to see this pattern, something shifts. The worry doesn't necessarily disappear immediately. These are deep habits, grooves worn into consciousness over a lifetime, over countless lifetimes if you believe in rebirth. But you begin to see worry for what it is, not a necessary response to danger, not a sign that you're being responsible, but a symptom of misunderstanding how reality works. And that seeing is the first step toward freedom. Because once you understand that worry is generated by clinging, and clinging is generated by the belief in permanence where no permanence exists, you can begin to investigate the alternative. What would it mean to live without demanding that things stay the same? What would it mean to move through life without trying to protect a self that was never truly solid? What would it mean to accept, deeply and completely, that everything changes, including you? This acceptance isn't resignation. It's not giving up or becoming passive. It's actually the opposite. It's seeing reality so clearly that you can respond to it skillfully without the added layer of suffering that comes from resistance. It's the difference between being tossed around by waves because you're fighting the ocean and learning to swim because you understand that water is fluid. Part 3. The practice of releasing the grip. Understanding the pattern is essential, but understanding alone doesn't liberate you from worry. The Buddha was absolutely clear about this. He didn't just explain suffering. He provided a path, a systematic training of the mind that moves from intellectual understanding to embodied wisdom. This is where theory becomes practice, where ideas become transformation. The first and most fundamental practice is what Buddhism calls letting go. But we need to be very careful about what this phrase means because it's often misunderstood. Letting go doesn't mean not caring. It doesn't mean becoming cold or detached or indifferent. It doesn't mean you stop loving people or pursuing goals or engaging with life. That would be a profound misunderstanding. To let go, in the Buddhist sense, means to release the clinging, the tight mental grip, the demand that things be other than they are. It means you can care deeply about something without requiring that it never change. You can love someone without needing to possess them. You can work toward a goal without making your happiness dependent on achieving it. You can prefer one outcome over another without suffering when reality takes a different path. Think about the difference between holding something in an open palm versus gripping it in a closed fist. In an open palm, the object can rest naturally. You're supporting it, but you're not strangling it. If it needs to move or change, it can do so freely. But when you grip something in a closed fist, you're creating tension. Your hand gets tired. The object might get damaged from too much pressure. And if something tries to remove that object, you suffer the pain of having it wrenched from your grasp. This is exactly how the mind works with worry. When you worry about your child's safety, you're not wrong to care about their well-being. That care is natural and beautiful. But when that care becomes a tight grip, when you believe you must control every aspect of their life to keep them safe, when you suffer intensely at any sign of risk or independence, you've moved from open palm care to closed fist clinging. And that clinging doesn't protect your child. It just makes you anxious and often makes them feel suffocated. The practice of letting go begins with noticing this grip. You can't release something if you don't know you're holding it. So the first step is awareness, and this is where mindfulness becomes absolutely crucial. Mindfulness, sati in Pali, is the practice of bringing clear, non-judgmental attention to your present moment experience. It's learning to observe what your mind is doing without immediately getting swept away by it. When a worry arises, and it will arise because that's what minds do, the untrained response is to get hooked immediately. The worry appears, and suddenly you're inside it, spinning out scenarios, tensing your body, lost in a stream of anxious thoughts about the future. This happens so quickly that you don't even notice the transition from peace to anxiety. One moment you're fine, the next moment you're worried, and you have no idea how you got there. Mindfulness slows this process down. With practice, you begin to notice the moment when worry first appears. You see it as it's arising before it has completely captured your attention. And in that noticing, something remarkable happens. There's a tiny gap,
a brief space between the appearance of the worried thought and your habitual response to it. And in that gap, choice becomes possible. This is the gateway to freedom. Not the freedom of never having worried thoughts. That's probably not realistic given how the human brain is wired. But the freedom of not being controlled by those thoughts, of seeing them as mental events rather than as truth, of being able to observe anxiety without becoming anxiety. The practice is actually quite simple in concept, though not always easy in execution. You sit quietly, or walk slowly, or simply pause in the middle of your day. You bring your attention to something stable, usually the breath. The physical sensation of breathing in and breathing out becomes an anchor, a place to return to when the mind wanders. And the mind will wander, within seconds sometimes. A worried thought will appear. What you do next is critical. You don't fight the thought. You don't judge yourself for having it. You don't try to push it away or replace it with a positive thought. You simply notice it. Oh, there's worry about money. Oh, there's anxiety about that conversation. Oh, there's fear about health. You label it gently and return your attention to the breath. This seems almost too simple to be effective, but something profound is happening. You're training your mind to recognize thoughts as thoughts rather than as reality. You're creating space around your mental activity. You're developing what Buddhism calls wise relationship with your own mind, where you're neither suppressed by thoughts nor swept away by them. Over time, this capacity grows stronger. You begin to notice worry arising in daily life, not just during formal meditation practice. You're at work and anxiety appears, and instead of immediately spiraling into catastrophic thinking, there's a moment of recognition. This is worry. This is my mind doing its protective thing. This is not necessarily an accurate assessment of reality. That recognition alone can prevent the escalation that usually follows. But mindfulness is just the beginning. To go deeper into releasing the grip, we need insight. And this is where Vipassana meditation comes in. Vipassana means seeing clearly, seeing things as they actually are, rather than through the lens of your projections and assumptions. And what you're looking to see clearly is the three marks we discussed earlier: impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and not self. In Vipassana practice, you don't just anchor attention on the breath. You observe the entire field of experience with clear, detailed awareness. You notice how sensations in the body arise, persist briefly, and dissolve. You watch how emotions build, peak, and fade away. You see how thoughts emerge from nowhere, occupy awareness for a moment, and disappear back into nowhere. Everything is in motion. Everything is impermanent. Not as an idea, but as direct, lived experience. When you see impermanence at this experiential level, something in your understanding shifts. It's no longer just a concept you agree with intellectually. It becomes a felt truth, something you know in your bones. And when you know in your bones that everything changes, the grip naturally begins to loosen. You can't hold on to what you clearly see is already slipping away. The attempt becomes obviously futile. This is where the Buddhist teaching about suffering being caused by clinging becomes experientially clear. You watch yourself worry about something, and you see in real time how that worry is actually a tightening, a mental contraction, a subtle form of violence against reality as it is. You feel the physical tension that accompanies worry. You notice the narrowing of awareness that happens when you're caught in anxious thinking. And you see that this tightening doesn't help. It doesn't solve the problem. It just adds a layer of suffering to whatever situation you're facing. There's a practice that can make this even more explicit. When worry arises, instead of trying to stop it, you can investigate it with curiosity. Where do you feel it in your body? Is there tightness in your chest? Tension in your shoulders? A knot in your stomach? Can you bring gentle, accepting awareness to those sensations? Not trying to make them go away, but simply feeling them with kindness. Then you can investigate the mental component. What exactly are you worried about? Not the vague sense of dread, but the specific scenario your mind is constructing. And here's the key question. Is this scenario happening right now, in this present moment? Or is it a mental projection about the future? Almost always, it's a projection. The suffering is happening now, but the cause of the suffering exists only in imagination. This doesn't mean the concern is illegitimate. There might be a real problem that needs addressing, but the worry about the problem is separate from the problem itself. And often, the worry makes it harder to address the actual problem skillfully because you're so caught up in anxious thinking that you can't see the situation clearly or respond with wisdom. Another powerful practice is what Buddhism calls metta, or loving kindness. This might seem unrelated to worry at first, but it's actually deeply connected. Worry often has a quality of self-centeredness to it, not in a selfish way, but in the sense that your attention becomes very tightly focused on your own concerns, your own problems, your own future. The world contracts to the boundaries of your personal anxiety. Metta practice deliberately reverses this contraction. You sit quietly and you begin to generate feelings of goodwill, first toward yourself. May I be safe. May I be peaceful. May I be free from worry. Then you expand that circle of goodwill. May my loved ones be safe. May all beings I encounter today be peaceful. May all beings everywhere be free from suffering. This might sound sentimental or wishful, but something interesting happens when you practice this sincerely. Your attention expands beyond the tight knot of personal concern. You remember that you're not alone in facing uncertainty. Everyone you meet is dealing with change, with loss, with fear. Everyone is trying to find their way through an unpredictable life. And in that recognition, your own concerns become less overwhelming. They don't disappear, but they fit into a larger context. There's also a practice of wisdom, panna, that involves asking clear questions when worry arises. Is this concern something I can actually influence right now? If yes, what's the wisest action I can take? If no, what's the point of depleting my peace over something I can't control? Can worry change the outcome? Does this anxiety serve any useful function? These aren't rhetorical questions. They're genuine inquiries meant to cut through the automatic assumption that worry is necessary or helpful. Often, when you examine worry closely, you discover it's a habit of mind rather than a useful response. Your brain has learned that anxiety feels like preparation, like responsibility, like caring. But it's possible to be prepared, responsible, and caring without being anxious. Those are actually separate qualities. The Zen master Shantideva put this beautifully in a teaching that gets right to the heart of the matter. He said, if there's a problem and you can solve it, then solve it, and there's no need to worry. If there's a problem and you can't solve it, then worry won't help, so there's still no need to worry. This isn't about being cavalier or irresponsible. It's about distinguishing between appropriate action and useless mental suffering. All of these practices, mindfulness, insight meditation, loving kindness, wisdom inquiry, they work together to create a fundamental shift in how you relate to your own mind. You begin to see that thoughts are not commands. Worries are not facts. The anxious voice in your head is not your wisest advisor. It's often just an old survival mechanism running a program that's no longer relevant to your actual circumstances. And in that seeing, letting go becomes natural. Not forced, not achieved through willpower, but arising naturally from clear understanding. It's like holding a burning coal and suddenly realizing you're holding a burning coal. You don't need someone to convince you to drop it. The moment you clearly see what's happening, the release is automatic. This is why the Buddha emphasized direct experience over belief. You don't need to believe that letting go will bring peace. You can test it directly. Try it right now if you're carrying any worry at this moment. Notice the worry, feel where it lives in your body, and then, just as an experiment, soften around it. Don't try to make it go away, but stop fueling it with additional anxious thinking. Breathe into the tense places. Let your shoulders drop. Return to the present moment, to what's actually happening right now, rather than what might happen later. What do you notice? For most people, there's an immediate sense of relief, even if it's subtle. The world doesn't fall apart when you stop worrying. In fact, you often think more clearly. You respond more skillfully. You access wisdom that was blocked by anxiety. This direct experience is more convincing than any teaching. The path of letting go is gradual. These are deep habits, and they don't transform overnight. You'll forget, you'll get caught in worry again and again. That's completely normal. The practice isn't about achieving a perfect state where you never worry. It's about developing the capacity to recognize worry when it appears, to release the grip consciously, and to return to presence over and over again. Think of it like learning to surf. At first, you fall off the board constantly. The waves knock you down. You swallow water. It's frustrating. But gradually, you develop balance. You learn to read the waves. You discover how to move with the ocean rather than fighting against it. And eventually, there are moments where you're riding the wave perfectly, in complete harmony with forces much larger than yourself. That's what these practices offer. Not control over life's uncertainty, but the ability to ride the waves of change with grace. Not the elimination of challenges, but the wisdom to meet them without adding unnecessary suffering. Not a life free from worry, but a life where worry no longer runs the show.
Part 4. The Gift Hidden in Impermanence. Here's where Buddhism offers something that might seem counterintuitive, even paradoxical. Everything we've explored so far, the clinging, the suffering, the need to let go, all of it stems from the fact that life is temporary. Impermanence is the condition that makes worry possible. If things didn't change, there would be nothing to fear losing. So you might assume that impermanence is the problem, the enemy, the source of all our troubles. But Buddhism turns this completely around. Impermanence isn't the problem, it's actually the gift. The very thing you've been fearing and resisting is the same thing that makes life meaningful, beautiful, and precious. Understanding this flip is one of the most liberating realizations you can have. Think about it carefully. If a flower bloomed and never wilted, would you treasure it? If you had unlimited time with the people you love, would you fully appreciate this particular conversation, this shared meal, this ordinary moment? If your life stretched endlessly into the future with no possibility of change or ending, would any single moment matter? The truth is, we often take things for granted precisely because we assume they'll always be available. You postpone important conversations because you tell yourself there will be time later. You delay pursuing your deepest values because you imagine you have decades ahead. You let ordinary moments pass unnoticed because you're waiting for something more significant to happen. And that assumption of permanence, that false sense that you have all the time in the world, that's what actually steals the richness from life. Impermanence does the opposite. When you truly internalize that this moment will never come again, That this day with this person in this configuration of circumstances is utterly unique and irreplaceable. Something shifts in how you pay attention. You become present in a way that's impossible when you're taking everything for granted. The Buddha's final words, spoken as he was dying, were not mournful or fearful. They were, "All conditioned things are impermanent. Strive on with heedfulness." This wasn't a lament, it was an encouragement. Because nothing lasts, pay attention. Because time is limited, don't waste it on what doesn't matter. Because you will die, live while you can. This awareness of impermanence, when held skillfully, doesn't create anxiety, it creates urgency in the best sense of that word. Not frantic rushing or desperate clinging, but a kind of wakeful clarity about what actually matters. It cuts through the trivial concerns that usually occupy your mind and brings you face to face with the essential questions. How do you want to spend this limited time? What values do you want to embody while you're here? What kind of person do you want to be in the face of inevitable change and loss? There's a practice in some Buddhist traditions called death contemplation, which sounds morbid, but is actually one of the most life-affirming practices you can engage in. You sit quietly, and you remember that you will die. Not in some distant theoretical future, but actually die. This body will stop working. This consciousness will cease in this particular form. Everyone you know will also die. Everything you've built will eventually crumble. This is not pessimism, this is truth. And when you sit with that truth, not in a depressed or nihilistic way, but with clear, accepting awareness, something remarkable happens. The petty concerns that usually consume your energy suddenly seem less important. The argument you had yesterday, the embarrassment you can't stop replaying, the slight from a colleague, the social media drama, all of it shrinks in significance. What expands is your appreciation for what you have right now. The people who are still alive and available, the body that, whatever its limitations, is still functioning, the capacity to see, to hear, to taste, to think, to feel, to love. None of this is guaranteed. None of it is permanent. And that fragility, that temporary nature, is exactly what makes it valuable. Think about how you feel when you're traveling and you know you're leaving a place soon. The last day in a beautiful location, the final evening with friends you won't see for a while, the closing hours of a meaningful experience. There's often a bittersweetness, yes, but also an intensification of presence. You notice more, you appreciate more, you're less caught in mental chatter because you know this specific moment is ending. What if you brought that same quality of attention to ordinary life? What if you recognized that every moment has that same temporary quality? You're always in the last day because today will never come again. You're always in the final hour of this particular configuration of circumstances because life is constantly shifting into new forms. This isn't about being morbid or depressive. It's about being awake. The Stoic philosophers, who weren't Buddhist but arrived at similar insights, practiced something they called memento mori, remember death, not to make themselves sad, but to remind themselves to live with integrity and presence. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and philosopher, wrote that you could leave life right now, so let that determine what you do and say and think. That advice isn't meant to create anxiety about death. It's meant to create clarity about life. When you remember that your time is limited, certain decisions become obvious. You forgive more quickly because holding grudges suddenly seems like a waste of precious time. You speak more honestly because you realize pretending for years is absurd if those years might be all you have. You pursue what actually matters to you rather than what you think you should want, because the approval of others means less when you're aware that both you and they are temporary. Impermanence also reveals something about the nature of love and connection. When you love someone while fully knowing they will die,
that they will change, that this relationship exists in time, and time doesn't stop, your love takes on a different quality. It becomes less about possession and more about appreciation, less about controlling the other person and more about meeting them exactly as they are in this moment. The anxiety that often accompanies love, the jealousy, the need for constant reassurance, the fear of abandonment, these often come from treating love as a form of ownership, my person, my relationship, my security. But when you see clearly that you don't own anyone, that everyone is moving through time in their own trajectory, that connection is a gift rather than a guarantee, love becomes lighter and simultaneously deeper. You can hold someone close while holding them loosely. You can commit fully while accepting that commitment exists in time. You can treasure connection without demanding that it never change. This isn't cold detachment. It's actually warmer and more genuine than the clingy, fearful love that tries to freeze relationships in amber. This understanding also transforms how you approach your own life and choices. When you remember that nothing lasts, including your current circumstances, your current beliefs, your current identity, you become more willing to take risks. Not reckless risks, but meaningful ones. You're less afraid of failure because you recognize that success is also temporary. You're less attached to your self-image because you see that image is constantly being revised anyway. This creates a kind of freedom that worry makes impossible. Worry keeps you small, keeps you safe, keeps you trapped in the familiar because the familiar feels controllable. But when you accept that control is limited and permanence is impossible, you might as well pursue what calls to you, express what moves you, become who you're capable of being, because you're going to change anyway. You might as well change in the direction of your values rather than in the direction of your fears. There's a beautiful teaching in Buddhism about the lotus flower. The lotus flower grows in muddy water, and it blooms above the surface into something beautiful. It doesn't bloom despite the mud. It blooms because of the mud. The messy, imperfect, impermanent conditions are not obstacles to beauty and meaning. They're the prerequisite for beauty and meaning. Your life is the same. The uncertainty you fear, the change you resist, the impermanence that worries you, these aren't flaws in existence. They're the conditions that make growth possible, that make love meaningful, that make this moment matter. Without them, life would be static, frozen, already complete. There would be nothing to do, nothing to become, nothing to discover. So the question isn't how to make life permanent or secure. That's impossible. The question is how to live fully within impermanence, how to find peace not despite change, but within change, how to let the temporary nature of everything enhance rather than diminish your engagement with life. This is what Buddhism means by embracing impermanence. Not passive acceptance of whatever happens, not giving up on preferences or effort, but seeing clearly that change is the nature of reality and then living with that awareness rather than in denial of it. It's dancing with life instead of fighting it. It's building sandcastles on the beach with full knowledge that the tide will come in and building them anyway because the building itself is the point. When you live this way, something interesting happens to worry. It doesn't necessarily disappear completely because, again, you have a human brain designed to anticipate threats, but it loses its grip. Worry becomes something you notice rather than something that defines you. It becomes information rather than identity. And in the space where worry used to dominate, you find presence, gratitude, courage, and a kind of peace that doesn't depend on everything staying the same. The peace that comes from embracing impermanence is fundamentally different from the peace you were looking for when you were trying to control everything. That old peace was conditional. I'll be okay if nothing changes, if I can prevent loss, if I can secure permanence. But that peace is always fragile because it depends on the impossible. This new peace, the peace of acceptance, is unconditional. It doesn't depend on circumstances staying frozen. It doesn't require that bad things never happen. It comes from understanding so clearly that everything changes that you stop being shocked by change. You stop being threatened by it. You start seeing it as simply what is, the basic fabric of existence, as natural as breath. And paradoxically, when you stop trying to make life permanent, you actually enjoy life more because you're not holding back, not saving yourself for some imaginary future when everything will be secure. You're here, now, fully engaged with this temporary, fragile, beautiful, heartbreaking, extraordinary experience of being alive. That's the gift hidden in impermanence. It's the secret that transforms worry from a prison into a teacher, showing you again and again where you're still clinging, where you're still demanding control, where you're still resisting the fundamental nature of reality. And every time you see that clinging and release it, you taste freedom. Not freedom from life, but freedom within life. Not escape from change, but the ability to flow with change without breaking. This is what the Buddha meant when he spoke of liberation. Not liberation into some other realm where nothing changes, but liberation right here, in the midst of this changing world, by seeing it so clearly that you're no longer at war with how it actually is. Conclusion: living without the weight. We've traveled through a complete investigation of worry, from its evolutionary roots in the human nervous system, through Buddhism's precise analysis of why we suffer, into the practices that release the grip, and finally to the recognition that impermanence itself, the thing we fear most, is actually what gives life meaning and urgency. So, where does this leave you? Not with a set of beliefs to adopt, but with an invitation to investigate your own experience. The Buddha was explicit about this. He said, "Don't believe something just because I taught it, or because it's written in ancient texts, or because everyone around you accepts it. Test it directly against your own lived reality." And that testing begins right now, in whatever moment you're experiencing as you hear these words. Is there worry present? If so, can you notice it without immediately being swept away by it? Can you feel where it lives in your body? Can you recognize the story your mind is telling about the future? And most importantly, can you ask yourself what you're clinging to, what permanence you're demanding, what control you're trying to exert? These questions aren't meant to shame you or make you feel you're doing something wrong. Worry is deeply human. Clinging is normal. The desire for security is natural. You're not broken because you experience anxiety. You're simply experiencing the inevitable result of having a human nervous system trying to navigate an uncertain world. But you're also not trapped. The practices Buddhism offers, mindfulness, insight meditation, letting go, embracing impermanence, these aren't esoteric techniques for special people. They're practical tools for working with the basic human condition. And they work, not in the sense of eliminating all difficulty from life, but in the sense of transforming your relationship with difficulty so that you suffer less and live more fully. The path isn't about reaching some perfect state where you never feel fear or anxiety. Even long-time meditation practitioners experience worry. The difference is they recognize it more quickly. They don't believe it as completely, and they know how to work with it skillfully. They've learned that thoughts are not commands, that feelings are not facts, that this too shall pass. That phrase, "this too shall pass," is often quoted, but it cuts both ways. Yes, difficult moments will pass. The crisis you're worried about, even if it happens, will eventually be replaced by new circumstances. That's comforting. But also, this present moment will pass. This day with people you love will end. This phase of life will give way to the next. That's not meant to depress you. It's meant to wake you up to the preciousness of now. Because ultimately, that's what all of this is about. Not escaping from life's temporary nature, but waking up to it so fully that you stop wasting your limited time on worry that doesn't serve you, so you can be present for the people and moments and experiences that actually matter. The Buddha taught that life is suffering, but that's only the first of the Four Noble Truths. The second truth is that suffering has a cause, and that cause is clinging. The third truth is that suffering can end when clinging ends. And the fourth truth is that there is a path, a practical method for ending that clinging. You've been introduced to that path today, not in its entirety, because a complete Buddhist practice is a lifetime's work, but you've seen the key principles. You've learned to recognize worry as a symptom of clinging to what cannot be held. You've explored practices for releasing that grip. And you've discovered that impermanence itself, the thing we fear most, is actually what gives life meaning and urgency. So where does this leave you? Not with a set of beliefs to adopt, but with an invitation to investigate your own experience. The Buddha was explicit about this. He said, "Don't believe something just because I taught it, or because it's written in ancient texts, or because everyone around you accepts it. Test it directly against your own lived reality." And that testing begins right now, in whatever moment you're experiencing as you hear these words. Is there worry present? If so, can you notice it without immediately being swept away by it? Can you feel where it lives in your body? Can you recognize the story your mind is telling about the future? And most importantly, can you ask yourself what you're clinging to? What permanence you're demanding? What control you're trying to exert? These questions aren't meant to shame you or make you feel you're doing something wrong. Worry is deeply human. Clinging is normal. The desire for security is natural. You're not broken because you experience anxiety. You're simply experiencing the inevitable result of having a human nervous system trying to navigate an uncertain world. But you're also not trapped. The practices Buddhism offers, mindfulness, insight meditation, letting go, embracing impermanence, these aren't esoteric techniques for special people. They're practical tools for working with the basic human condition. And they work. Not in the sense of eliminating all difficulty from life, but in the sense of transforming your relationship with difficulty so that you suffer less and live more fully. The path isn't about reaching some perfect state where you never feel fear or anxiety. Even long-time meditation practitioners experience worry. The difference is they recognize it more quickly. They don't believe it as completely, and they know how to work with it skillfully. They've learned that thoughts are not commands, that feelings are not facts, that this too shall pass. That phrase, "this too shall pass," is often quoted, but it cuts both ways. Yes, difficult moments will pass. The crisis you're worried about, even if it happens, will eventually be replaced by new circumstances. That's comforting. But also, this present moment will pass. This day with people you love will end. This phase of life will give way to the next. That's not meant to depress you. It's meant to wake you up to the preciousness of now. Because ultimately, that's what all of this is about. Not escaping from life's temporary nature, but waking up to it so fully that you stop wasting your limited time on worry that doesn't serve you, so you can be present for the people and moments and experiences that actually matter. The Buddha taught that life is suffering, but that's only the first of the Four Noble Truths. The second truth is that suffering has a cause, and that cause is clinging. The third truth is that suffering can end when clinging ends. And the fourth truth is that there is a path, a practical method for ending that clinging. You've been introduced to that path today, not in its entirety, because a complete Buddhist practice is a lifetime's work, but you've seen the key principles. You've learned to recognize worry as a symptom of clinging to what cannot be held. You've explored practices for releasing that grip, and you've discovered that impermanence itself, the thing we fear most, is actually what gives life meaning and urgency. So where does this leave you? Not with a set of beliefs to adopt, but with an invitation to investigate your own experience. The next time worry arises, you could pause and investigate it. You could sit for 5 minutes and practice mindfulness of breath. You could ask yourself what you're clinging to and whether that clinging is helping. Small practices accumulate. A moment of presence here, a conscious release of worry there, a recognition that this moment matters because it's temporary. Over time, these moments add up to a fundamental shift in how you move through the world. You become less driven by fear and more guided by values, less caught in automatic reactivity and more capable of wise response, less burdened by the weight of trying to control everything and more able to simply meet life as it unfolds. This is the promise of the path. Not that life becomes easy or predictable or free from challenge, but that you become more flexible, more resilient, more at peace with the fundamental nature of reality. You develop what Buddhism calls equanimity, a quality of mind that can remain balanced even as circumstances change, not because you don't care, but because you care without clinging. And in that balance, you find something that worry always promised but never delivered. Actual peace. Not the fragile peace that depends on everything going your way, but the deep peace that comes from no longer being at war with how life actually is. The peace of accepting that you're human, that you're temporary, that you're part of this vast, changing, mysterious universe, and that your time here, limited as it is enough. More than enough. It's everything. So if life is temporary, why worry so much? The Buddhist answer is clear. You don't have to. Worry is a habit, not a requirement. And like any habit, it can be seen, understood, and gradually transformed through practice. Not into some impossible state of perpetual bliss, but into something more real and more sustainable. A life lived with presence, with courage, with compassion for yourself and others, and with deep appreciation for the fleeting, precious gift of existence. That transformation begins now, not tomorrow, not when circumstances improve, not when you finally get everything figured out. Now, in this breath, in this choice to be present, rather than lost in worry about the future. In this moment of recognizing that you're alive, that this is temporary, and that both of those truths are invitations to wake up and live fully while you can. The paradox of worry in a temporary life resolves when you stop treating impermanence as a problem to solve and start seeing it as the very condition that makes meaning possible. When you do that, worry loses its power, not all at once, but gradually, like the slow turning of a ship changing course. And where worry once dominated, you find space. Space for peace, for presence, for love, for life itself. That space is always available. It's here right now, waiting for you to stop resisting what is and start embracing what could be. A life lived with eyes wide open, heart fully engaged, and mind at peace with the beautiful, heartbreaking, temporary nature of all things. This is the path. This is the practice. This is the gift that Buddhism offers to anyone willing to look clearly at their own mind and discover that freedom from worry isn't about changing life's temporary nature. It's about changing how you relate to it. And that change is always, always available right now.